Agencies are only as good as the direction you give them. And, for us, the responsibility from a client perspective is to make sure that we're giving very clear direction in terms of what are our objectives, what are our goals, what is the problem that we're trying to solve for, but also balance that with giving an agency room to think and to be creative and to do their work.
This is You Should Talk To, a podcast for busy marketing leaders who are looking for support and tips on getting shit done. In each episode, Daniel Weiner interviews marketing leaders and discusses their experience, successes, and failures around hiring agencies. If you're interested in finding and choosing the right agency partner, then let's jump in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the You Should Talk To podcast. I am Daniel Weiner, your host as well as sponsor, and You Should Talk To pairs brands and marketers for free with vetted agencies and or freelancers because finding great agencies is a pain in the ass. Super excited to be joined today by Sergio Pérez, who is Senior Director of Omnichannel Marketing at Bojangles. I would feel remiss to not say, as of right now, it is Bo time. Sergio, thank you for joining us.
It's about time indeed. I appreciate the time and I appreciate you having me today.
Yeah, let's jump in. What is an unpopular opinion you have in the marketing world or a hot take of sorts? You've been in this world for a long time now.
For sure. I think you're hearing a lot about this in the space right now, but I would say my hot take for 2023, if you will, is that I'm not convinced AI and automation is sort of all the hype in terms of really replacing that human connection and feeling. I mean, I think there's, like I said, a lot of chatter around, it might be replacing functions or specific tasks. And I think as marketers, we really should look at these tools sort of in two ways. I think sort of in the short term as maybe a way for us to become more efficient in some of the task rabbit things that we got to do. And then maybe over the longer term, leveraging AI and automation as a way to become smarter to accelerate growth. But I think there's a lot of sort of fear, if you will, that these tools might be taking over the world. And while I think that might be a case at some point, I think in the short term, it might not be, too much hype over those two things.
I actually agree with your hot take there. I'm not as bullish on ChatGPT, and in that world, at least, I think AI is amazing. And to your point, there's definitely applications, and from a marketing perspective, probably makes certain things easier or, a first pass at certain things from a copy perspective. But yeah, I'll be interested to see. I also have, like the last 10 times I've tried playing with it, it's been full and I haven't been able to access it. So
I will say that I wish I had that in college to say, tell me the history of, creating chicken sandwiches, and it will give me a very short summary of what I would need for, some sort of paper or exam. But, I wish this was a few years ago.
Yeah, I'm with you. It probably would have made college a lot easier for many of us marketers,
For sure.
But you've worked in food most of your career. Tell us a little bit about the journey to get here and kind of what you've learned along the way.
Yeah, so I will take you way, way back. I didn't realize it at the time, but I realize it now that really kind of my career or my learnings began, I think, in my mother's kitchen. And that might sound a bit romantic, but what being in that kitchen really made me realize was sort of the importance of food, the importance of sort of doing things the right way and, putting a little bit of love and care and craft into the food. And, I was sort of fortunate enough to grow up in a family that actually operated restaurants. So I, cleaned tables. I, sort of saw what it was like to, be a franchisee. And it just really gave me an appreciation for the fact that we have a responsibility as sort of restaurant people to deliver meaningful experiences to people. You can sort of think about a moment in which you were either very hungry and you showed up to a restaurant and, food took too long, or you had cold food or the incorrect order. It has a way to almost be a little bit soul crushing, right? But if you do it right, if you got great service, if you got good food, it almost creates a moment for you to engage with the people you're around in a more meaningful way. So it sort of gave me generally an appreciation for food and sort of the craft of the food. I think, fast forwarding, into my career, I would say that, the headline and those learnings really have led me to really, leading digital transformations for iconic brands. I've had the fortune of working across a sort of a broad spectrum of different restaurant brands. So started my career in QSR with Church's Chicken, moved over to fast casual with Johnny Rockets in California, worked down in buffet in San Diego with Garden Fresh Restaurants, came to Atlanta for family dining with Huddle House and Perkins. And I am back both where I started with fried chicken and QSR at Bojangles. But I think the couple of things that I would say the big truths, if you will, that have been constant through both my experience in growing up in restaurants and my experience in, leading those digital transformations of brands is that I think first and foremost, restaurants are not created equal. I think there is a sense that because you are a national brand or a regional brand, that you see the brand logo and the experience is the same. I think every single community is made up by different individuals and different people and different employees. So you really need to lean into, personalization and really localizing the experience as much as possible to be able to, really make a meaningful connection to those communities to drive as much, results in terms of, sales driving and community building. The second might be a bit of a hot take, particularly for my operations colleagues, but marketing can solve for a bad restaurant experience or bad operations. It doesn't matter how brilliant your marketing campaign is. It doesn't matter how much you're spending from an advertising standpoint. If food's not hot, if food's not accurate, if you don't have good service, you're not going to be able to drive a repeat visit. So it all starts with the basics of driving a good experience and allowing marketing to sort of amplify that great work that, our restaurants are doing. And I would say the third, big truth is in order for you to sort of break through and really make a meaningful impact, you've got to find the cross section between, food, culture, and people to really find those moments and those places in which people are engaging to be able to deliver either content, messaging, advertising, or whatever it is that you do to communicate with your users to really drive, I think, a meaningful experience that, no pun intended, will create some cravability and will create a reason why you would want to recreate that experience again, right? So for me, I think those are if I had a restaurant marketing book or a restaurant book, those would be sort of the three lessons that I would focus on.
You may get a book deal after this, Sergio. We get a good listenership here. You just touched on a couple of them. It's kind of a me repeating the question in a different way, but I'm curious. You talk about all those things. In general, food space, super crowded. There's so many options when people are, like you said, craving something. In a crowded space, how do you gain attention in this space? I mean, we were, I think, still in the chicken wars and stuff like that. But in general, what's your recommendation for kind of just winning the attention? You mentioned meeting your, customers where they are and stuff like that. What's the overall gist of how you can, find that and win when the attention is the battle?
For sure. I think battle might be, the right word here. I think if you talk to restaurant marketers, particularly over the last 2.5, 3 years, it's always been a street fight, right? You're consistently fighting for what I like to call share of stomach. But over the last 3 years, it's become a lot more heightened because restaurant marketers have sort of thrown the playbook out and really have been in what I would call, crisis communication mode, right? A lot of your marketing has shifted, or over the last 2.5 years, shifted to talking about things like we're still open or, health and sanitation messages and really accelerating, digital capabilities to make sure that restaurants could stay afloat, that people feel comfortable in, visiting restaurants. And as we turn the tide from what was the height of the pandemic, I feel like 2023 is a year to sort of reestablish our position as a restaurant industry, to remind customers and people why they love going out to eat. And I think, sparking that cravability by doing that third thing I talked about, which is finding that cross section between people, culture, and food to make sure that we are romanticizing the food story, that we're romanticizing the idea of people coming together and sharing a plate of food over, whether it's at one of our restaurants or whether it's at your house, sharing it among people. It is about, reestablishing that and sparking that capability again that, a lot of folks sort of, I wouldn't say lost, but that, wasn't as much of a priority as people were dealing with the big changes that the world has seen, over the last couple of years.
What was your biggest learning from, truthfully, COVID and that exercise in marketing?
I would say that, people continue to be at the core of everything, that people matter, and that at that point, it's not about a KPI, it's not about a conversion, it's not about anything else, but it reminds you that this industry is built by people to serve people. And it was great to see how agencies also threw the playbook out, and a lot of innovation happened over the last 2 years. A lot of digital platforms were built, a lot of new sort of media models and, ways to communicate with people have appeared. So it, I think, reassured all of us that this industry is resilient, and that when times are tough, this is where some of the best innovation happen. So I would say the headline for me is, people matter, and that still hasn't changed regardless of what happens in the world.
I think it's interesting too. You touched on it, especially in food, but I think across all marketing sectors, we often forget, to your point, you can have the best marketing in the world that drives everybody to your restaurant, but if you don't give a positive experience and your operations aren't right and the food orders aren't accurate and stuff like that, they're not coming back, and the marketing was wasteful to a certain degree. So I interviewed several, people in the food marketing space. It's interesting to hear that perspective because I haven't heard it like that. And I think, truthfully, myself included, forget that oftentimes. You're thinking of the big creative idea and you forget, we got them there, and you think that's the win. You're like, oh shit, now we got to figure out how to actually make them happy. We forget that part. The repeat business is the important stuff.
That's what matters, right? It's not about, first impressions matter, and they do. But you build businesses by driving positive traffic, right? And making sure that people continue to, show up to the restaurants. As a marketer, you also learn that it's easier to spend dollars and it's cheaper to spend dollars to retain customers than it is to buy them, right? So how do we work to build experiences that keep people coming back versus consistently having to buy, ourselves out of, a problem?
Yeah. You talked about agencies innovating during COVID and all that sort of stuff. In general, what's your overall opinion of agencies? Love them, hate them? They get an interesting rep in my world. A necessary evil to some. Some love them.
I would agree with you. I would say that I would answer the question by saying I love agencies that, really inspire us with work that has the potential to drive business. I don't like agencies that don't understand the business and that, bring ideas to the forefront that won't really make an impact. And I think for me, while there's lots of great agencies out in the world, I think it's important to work with agencies that understand the restaurant business specifically, because we have a bit of a different dynamic. There's, when you have to teach an agency what comp sales are, for example, or what's it like to work within a franchise system that has individual business owners that sort of have, their own objectives and goals and ambitions. You want to make sure that you're working with people that understand, even the process of making food, right? And, if you're going to shoot a commercial, you might not be able to, shut down a full restaurant completely. So having agencies that understand the complexities and the intricacies of the business is critical, because I think it enables us to move quickly, and it gives us sort of a competitive advantage in terms of speed to be able to make better decisions for restaurants and restaurant brands versus having to, spend an awful lot of time teaching an agency how our business works, the impact that operations has on the business, so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting. And before I get into the next question, this kind of leads into it. I find food to be one of the particular verticals where it is very, normally I would disagree and say category experience isn't a necessity, but I do agree to a certain extent in food. I'm curious, when you're looking for a new agency, I find folks in food, especially in your roles, are reaching out to other brands, truthfully their counterparts that they've either worked with in the past or know and respect. Is that how what's your process typically outside of knowing me, of course, and solely use it. But how are you finding great vendors? Are you typically asking counterparts and stuff like that?
Yeah, as I said sort of early on, this industry is built by people, and the degree of separation in this industry is sometimes scary in terms of somehow, some way, someone's connected to somebody, whether somebody you work with, a franchisee, you name it. So I am a big believer in having sort of a trust of people that I sort of engage with in a consistent basis. And this is sort of how I like to operate, not only to find, vendors and agencies, but to really talk about how we're solving today's problem, or, how do we find the next big idea? So I'd like to first sort of first identify what I'm looking for, whether it's a vendor, an agency, a service. I like to sort of reach out to my network and say, hey, I'm looking for a new agency to build a mobile app, for example. Who have you worked with? Do you have any recommendations? I then take that a little bit of a step further and do a bit of my own research. I like to sort of see who's, up and coming, who's either receiving any sort of awards or notoriety. And then I make a very short list of vendors, services, or partners that I want to talk to, because I also believe in the efficiency of, moving quickly through that process to ultimately the sooner you can onboard a partner or a vendor, the sooner you can make an impact on the business. So by being laser focused on what you're looking for, what you're trying to build or accomplish, it gives everybody clarity as to, if you're going to be a good match, if you're going to be able to move quickly, and ultimately, if that partnership or relationship has a prospect of working out.
Sure. And most folks with your title that I speak with, especially on this podcast, are getting hit up every day, typically, by vendors, services, products, all that sort of stuff. Is that similar to your experience?
100%. And
I can tell by the deep sigh you took when answering.
I do. And I sigh because it is, 3 to 5 comms a day, right? Whether it's an email, whether it's a LinkedIn message. And, it's interesting you say that a little bit ago, maybe about 20 minutes ago, I got a text from a random number saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, saw you on LinkedIn, would love to talk about XYZ. And that's the first time I've actually gotten a message like that in terms of a text message.
You said, I'm busy. I'm going on the biggest marketing podcast in the country. I can't talk.
Exactly. I'm about to get a book deal. But but I would say that, the inbound communications have certainly increased over the last 2 years. I think there's been, particularly with the growth of technology in the restaurant space, there's been a lot of opportunity for digital transformation and digital work to happen. So a lot of marketing technology companies in the restaurant space have built big sales teams. And I can tell you with full transparency that I have not once bought a product or worked with an agency out of sort of a cold call, email, or text message. That's never happened. I'm not saying that it wouldn't happen, but as I talk to you about my process, I like to know who I want to talk to and why I want to talk to them versus the other way around.
That I answered my own next question of if there's anything somebody can say to stand out in those. Is there, I guess, to even make you jot down on a piece of paper, like maybe I'll look at them later, or not your thing?
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, I would say first and foremost, a strong record of driving results for a restaurant industry. I think you will always get the ear of a restaurant marketer or a restaurant professional, period, if you can talk about driving, incremental sales to the business. Who doesn't want more sales in their restaurants? So if there is a way to sort of tell that story and say, look, have this new product, or we've identified, this new idea that has driven this result for these restaurants, it gives you some pause, right? And so, look, what we're all tasked with is not only protecting, the brands we work with, but also growing our brands from a financial standpoint. So if anybody, has a service or a product or an idea that will help us do that, we're certainly all ears. But I think for me, the biggest thing, in that space too, is I think we're also moving into a space where you want to work with partners and agencies that are a little bit more nimble and scrappy, because this industry moves so quickly. So I would say those would be probably the two biggest things for me: the ability to drive results and the ability to sort of be nimble and adjust to the environment in which we are, working.
And in general, once you've put together your list, you've asked your colleagues, you've got, say, 3 or 4 folks that you want to reach out to and start having those conversations. What are you evaluating on? I know you just mentioned driving results in
Yeah.
restaurant world and stuff like that. But how can somebody stand out even on a general call? Are you looking for specific to work? My hot take of sorts is that the work doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is, of course it matters, but the rapport side is so important, and agencies oftentimes forget that. What are you thinking of in those initial calls to like move somebody on to that next round, I guess?
For sure. I think first and foremost, that track record of driving results is incredibly important to this resilience aspect of being nimble and scrappy and being able to move with the pace of the business. I would say three would be sort of creativity. And sort of what I mean by that is, the restaurant playbook can be, simplified and, you need to have product views. You've got to have a great media plan. You got to find relevant moments within a calendar to drive sales. But how do you reinvent launching a new LTL product? How do you reinvent the wheel a little bit to find sort of a different, more innovative, relevant way to do something? So I'm constantly looking at sort of innovation, relevancy, and sort of how they think about the business. And then the last piece for me, particularly at a brand like Bojangles, is you want to talk to people that actually know the brand and that actually have a passion for what we're doing, whether it's, the Southern values that we have, or whether it's, the fandom that this brand has sort of across the country. We want people to feel connected to us, that have, a fandom for what we do. And that ultimately can, at least initially, create some excitement around what a future partnership would look like in terms of driving the business. So I would say the headline is get us excited about your work and your thinking. That will help us move, Bojangles to a national stage. And if you can do that, then, I'll talk to you, all day long.
I've seen a big shift since COVID, especially, of what I'll call bigger named brands or brands with name notoriety moving towards smaller independent agencies that are specialized in, call it, 1 to 3 services. What do you think of that? Have you seen that shift as well? And just what's your opinion on kind of smaller specialized agencies in general?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting shift driven by sort of how the last couple of years have transpired in terms of the needs of the business. And I particularly am a big fan of that idea. And I almost think about it as a collective of agencies, right? I think, we want to find the people that are the best at what they do, not okay at a lot of things. And almost building a collective of who can do PR the best, who can do creative the best, who can build digital experiences the best, and sort of building a collective of subject matter experts that, when you sort of have more brain power across a couple of different agencies, it creates sort of a hub of creativity, of, strategic thinking, of ideation, and it brings more perspectives to the table, which is incredibly important as, you're constantly trying to find what the next big idea is, what the next platform is going to be, what the next opportunity for us to find relevance is. And I feel like by having more people at the table that are subject matter experts in specific areas gives us a better chance at finding that next big thing.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Can you think of a really great agency experience you've had in the past and what made it so great?
I would say, you love it when an agency unprompted comes to you with an insight they found by digging through the data, or a creative idea that, sort of somebody woke up in the middle of the night and came to you and said, hey, I've been thinking about X, Y, Z, and this is something we can execute. So one thing that we did last year is sort of at the height of kind of the gas conversation with customers, we had an idea around if this is something that's top of mind for consumers. People are talking about it in the news. It's sort of a trending topic across, social platforms and conversations. We decided to do $1 million gas giveaway last year. And basically we said, if you purchase X, you will get a $10 gift card when you visit the restaurant. And it was something that we sort of turned around sort of fairly quickly, talking about that nimble, sort of speedy side of things. But it came out of this sort of insight that, people were feeling the gas pump crunch. And we thought, that's what people are talking about. How do we find a way to capitalize on that conversation and also be able to drive, visits to our restaurants. So that would be an example of how people, culture, and food sort of came together in a bit of an unorthodox way to be able to, drive to the end result, which was driving more visits to our restaurants.
Sure. And the client agency relationship is an interesting one, I would say, specific to the marketing world. Ever changing, very dynamic, a fickle one at times. How do you handle it? But also, what is your tip for somebody else in your role, a marketing leader, to get the best out of your agency partners?
I think that I've always believed that, agencies are only as good as the direction you give them, right? And, for us, the responsibility from a client perspective is to make sure that we're giving very clear direction in terms of what are our objectives, what are our goals, what is the problem that we're trying to solve for, but also balance that with giving an agency room to think and to be creative and to do their work. So for me, where I've found to be the most successful in working with agencies is establishing really clear expectations, really clear guidelines, because you get closer at delivering the result. You see the memes all the time of, people saying, when you give feedback or direction, when you say, make the font a little bit bigger or make that stand out a little bit more, what does that actually mean in terms of actual direction? And the interpretation of make this a little bit better or make this a little bit bigger could be interpreted differently by creatives, by, the people you're communicating with, versus you saying, hey, I need you to take that up, 20% bigger. And when you give people very clear direction, you end up getting better results. So I think providing clear direction is, by far probably the most important thing. And then two, I think having incredible transparency and candor with your partners. We're in this together, and their success is our success and vice versa. And we want to work with partners that care about the business and the brand like we care about the business and the brand. And it is when you build those kind of strong relationships based on, respect, transparency, great direction, and sort of shared responsibility, it also becomes a relationship that goes outside of the scope of work, right? I think a lot of places where you can get in some trouble is, well, the scope says X, or, we're not really scoped to do that. And we're not saying do work for free, but what we're saying is there's things that sometimes require you to go outside the scope to say, look, we got to get this done and sort it out. And that's where sort of that resiliency, nimbleness comes from. So for me, those are important rules of engagement, if you will, with working with, strong agency partners.
Talk me through, it doesn't even have to be a bad one, just a negative agency experience you've had in the past and what made it, more on the negative side.
I would characterize it as, agencies that deliver bad execution against a brief. We take big pride in giving great direction to agency partners and, being transparent and sort of making them an extension of the team. And when you get, work back that just doesn't match the brief or doesn't match the intricacies of, the system, for example, planning a big production shoot that will require a restaurant to be closed for 3 days when, what feeds the franchisee who owns that restaurant is keeping that restaurant open are, some examples of how sometimes working with agencies can be a challenge because, they either don't understand the assignment or propose, ideas, activations, or executions that, have a negative impact on, the profitability of some of our franchisees.
Do you think that negative situation can be salvaged once it's occurred and get back on the rails? Or in there's a million agencies out there. I think the last I saw was 90,000 in the US alone. Have you moved on once the seed of doubt has been planted, or you're willing to depend situational, I presume, but talk me through that a little bit.
So I've only transitioned out of an agency in a previous life once. And the way I would describe it is, agency client relationships are a little bit like a marriage, right? You're sort of in it together and health and illness. But I do believe that, similar to like a marriage, there's a point where I think one or the other partner feels like it might be over and it might be, time to get a divorce, if you will. And because our relationship with agencies is one of partnership and us being transparent and them having a seat at the table, it becomes very evident at some point where it's time to move on. And I think the minute you start thinking about, I'm not sure I have the right partner, or I'm not sure this is working, trying to salvage it through marriage counseling, sometimes one, it just sort of makes the end more elongated than it should be. And sometimes sort of quicker, cleaner break makes it easier for everybody to sort of move on, reset, and, get going on, a next partnership. But generally, when you start to have some doubts about your partners, just like in any relationship, likely is that you gotta, break away.
I find too, truthfully, with dealing with brands of your size, also, it's typically a messier divorce only because you're typically more entrenched in the business and it's just harder to break away oftentimes than, a smaller brand who's not as in bed with that client or that agency.
For sure. And that's why I think the collective sort of thought in terms of collective agencies is an interesting thought too, because it allows you to plug and play one function versus having to, completely unplug an entire, AOR that handles all the portions of your business. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility, I think, replacing one part of the car versus having to, replace the entire car.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. What do you think is something that oftentimes agencies get wrong or something that you wish more of them, quote unquote, got or understood? If you could give a blanket statement to all the agencies out there.
I would go back to franchisees because I think, I had a great mentor one time tell me that people's paychecks depend on our work. And I think that brings a level of responsibilities to all of us collectively from a marketing perspective to make sure that we have a responsibility to not just the brand, but the people who have invested in this brand, the franchisees who, maybe took a mortgage out to get a restaurant, the employees that they employ through that restaurant. And we have a responsibility to not just create the next flashy thing that's going to land us in the trades, but a responsibility to do meaningful work that's actually going to drive sales. Because ultimately that is the measure of success. It's not, how many awards you got, not, sort of the next big, idea that puts you on a publication, but it is our ability to actually grow profits for our franchisees. And particularly for me, that's close to home because, like I said at the beginning, I grew up with a family that owned restaurants. And when I think about them, I think about, my folks, and I think about that's how, I got through college. That's how they paid the bills. And I think oftentimes it's easy to forget, whether you're an agency or a restaurant marketer, that at the end of the day, it is about how are we driving results for the brand and the stakeholders and our franchisees, and not so much about the cute idea that will look great for the next publication.
That's totally fair. I know the answer to the next question is not ChatGPT, but I'll ask it anyways. What are you most bullish on in the marketing space at the moment? I think we're out of our NFT metaverse bubble, maybe. I'm not entirely sure. There's in-person events are back, trade shows, all sorts of stuff. What are you most excited about?
I think as a restaurant marketer, I'm most excited about the acceleration of the digital transformation in the space. 10 years ago, few brands were on things like online ordering and really participating in digital platforms, period. Over the last 5 years, but particularly over the last 3 years, there's been a bit of an arms race to build capabilities to create accessibility to people for food, but also to start to ramp up data operations, right? One of the downfalls of the restaurant industry is that it's significantly behind in leveraging data to make better, smarter decisions, investments, and, driving conversions. So we're going through this, what I would maybe characterize as a technology renaissance where, restaurant brands are uncovering that there's a lot of customer data that could be available to us and that we can leverage to drive further personalization, drive more localization, to make their restaurant experiences better. So for me, as a digital professional, it's been very heartwarming to see a lot of brands talk about the importance of digital, talk about the importance of data. But you've got retail looking at it saying, well, we've been doing this for 10, 20, plus years. So how that is going to change the way restaurant brands market is going to be interesting. And the second thing for me in that same vein is the iteration of sort of next generation loyalty programs. I've got lots of hot takes on this, but my headline being, I believe that loyalty programs within the restaurant industry are broken. I believe that points don't actually drive any additional action. And it's about how do you build the loyalty program of the future that really focuses on customer data and how people are engaging with your brand and your product to deliver more meaningful experiences versus get 100 points and turn that into a free chicken sandwich or a free eggs. It's less about, creating these transactional models and more about how do you really get back to getting to know people and making sure that we are, delivering those personalized experiences to drive repeat visit, which is what is probably the most important to grow our business.
If you launch your own loyalty platform, you can come talk about it on the podcast. We'll do it whenever you're ready to launch the next version of it.
I can't confirm nor deny, so we'll see.
What keeps you up at night from a marketing or business standpoint?
A lot, but I would say the big thing is the economic uncertainty that customers might have over the next year. You see what's happening on a macro level around the world, whether it's, Asia or Europe or the war in Ukraine. All those things create uncertainty from an economic standpoint. And while none of us have a crystal ball, anytime there's uncertainty in the market in any way, it limits people's ability to, play with their money a little bit more or be more flexible when it comes to finances. And, as you're looking to either cut back or be more risk averse, you tend to cut things like entertainment and food are so the first things to go. So, for me, it's what impact does this uncertainty have in people's willingness to continue to go out to eat at the same frequency? And what that means is that we've got to work harder at having great operations and great experiences in restaurants. And we've got to continue working hard to find those relevant moments with customers to make sure that they know that a dollar spent here is better spent than a dollar with a different brand. So it makes us sharpen our pencils and, work a little bit harder to earn that business.
Yeah, that's makes total sense. That concludes the marketing portion. I'll give you a couple rapid fire questions and then we'll wrap up here. I think I know the answer. You mentioned restaurants. Your very first job working at your family's restaurants?
Yeah, cleaning tables and bussing tables. So I had to work my way up. So that was my first gig.
Mine was bussing tables as well, and I made the leap to Food Expo of running food at an Italian restaurant called Ippolito. So I'm with you there. What do you think that you've talked about it throughout the podcast a little, but I ask everybody, what do you think you brought from that experience into kind of like your leadership role now, either externally to franchisees or internally to people you work with?
I think the headline for me is empathy. I think it makes you, particularly the last 2 years and the grind and the resilience that particularly restaurant employees saw and dealt with, it gave you a lot of empathy for people. So for me, that's something that is incredibly important in today's business world, to make sure that you have an eye at not just driving the business, but eye also at people and making sure that we're far more, understanding of what's going on in the world.
You've worked in food a lot, so I'm especially interested in this. What's your final meal if you had to pick one?
As a good Texan, it's got to be steak tacos with a handmade flour tortilla and handmade salsa. There's nothing like, a taco with freshly made ingredients. And for me, a handmade tortilla is just, heaven on earth.
I'm with you. I may pick that as mine. Normally I answer sushi, but now I'm in the mood for a taco. And the final question I've got for you, who is somebody who inspires you either personally or professionally or both?
I'll go back to one of my first answers, but I would say restaurant employees. And it's not one particular person, but over the last 3 years, restaurant employees really were the lifeline of our business. They worked long hours. They, put up with a lot of uncertainty when it comes to, customers and restaurants being closed and supply chain, issues. And through it all, they've been resilient. And that's sort of the story of the restaurant industry. Regardless of what crisis has happened in the country, restaurant brands and restaurant people have found a way to innovate, to find a way to, overcome whatever challenge. And when you visit a restaurant and you see how hard they work to deliver a good meal, to take care of a customer, it makes us here in this building work a little bit harder for them, because if it isn't for them, there's no restaurant and there's no food going out of this kitchen. So for me, our restaurant employees, not just here at this brand, but across the country, play an important, vital role in feeding our communities. And oftentimes they don't get either, the credit they do for helping feed, America. So for me, it's all those restaurant workers that, have made it through a very challenging 2.5 years or so.
Yeah, that's great. I would say in general, having worked in restaurants, restaurant people deal with a lot of shit, truthfully. So it's good to hear them called out. And no, I appreciate you joining. I also kind of want one of those pullovers you're wearing. So if you've got an extra one of those, it looks like that's exclusive. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but yeah, that is quite the pullover. So thank you for.
Listen, we're happy to see the logo represented anywhere we can. So send me your address and I'm happy to send a care package with, some cool swag for you to say it's bow time.
That's what we like to hear. Thank you very much, Sergio. I look forward to hearing and seeing more of what comes from Bojangles in 2023. And thank you for joining.
I appreciate it. It's bow time.
Thank you for checking out this episode of You Should Talk To. This show is brought to you by the company with the same name, You Should Talk To, a company that helps marketing leaders find the right agency or freelancer for their situation. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow You Should Talk To wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit youshouldtalkto.com for more information.